Johnny Manziel will become even bigger in the city of Cleveland than his buddy and business partner LeBron James ever was.
There's a lot of concern about Alabama's running back Derrick Henry in the NFL. I wouldn't touch him.
Let me say this straight up and down. I think Kyrie Irving should retire.
They brought a guy in, and they were talking this guy up like crazy, and he hasn't produced anything yet. The Yankees are lucky they didn't get him.
I want Iguodala.
So to me, ultimately, maybe he'll thrive in, say, a Lou Williams role. Well, you win some, you lose some. And when it comes to takes, everybody's got one. But where did they originate from? And why do we care so much about them?
Sports is an avenue that allows everybody to feel like they're smart, or everybody to feel like they're some sort of expert, because there is no certification process for this.
Because we care about opinions, and increasingly so, which may not be the best thing for the culture.
Because everybody wants to be right.
It's like what we care about more than everything else.
Before it gets too hot in here, let's take you back to the beginning. Sports journalism actually began in the 1820s and 1830s with mostly coverage of boxing and horse racing. But even that was still 100 years before anyone could question whether Seabiscuit had the clutch gene. And the coverage remained sporadic, though it probably didn't stop friends from sending takes to one another via telegram. When it comes to covering sports in earnest, it may have all started with this guy. No, not that guy. This guy. No, not him either. This guy. The esteemed Henry Chadwick, largely regarded as the first professional American sports writer and the architect of the box score. However, any reference to war was still in regards to 1812 or civil, not wins above replacement player. But let's be honest, unless you're Bill James, just the box score is a bore. Eventually, fans needed more. Enter the columnist.
I think if you asked him, God would have liked to have been a national major sports columnist.
And why wouldn't a burgeoning sports writer become a columnist and practice their prose? They were the only writers to get their pictures in that section of the paper, after all.
Yeah, there were two major ways of following the world: newspapers and your local broadcasts.
So the columnist was supposed to bring you insight and frank opinions, which they, of course, now stupidly call hot takes.
Then, in 1964, Bill Mazer debuted the first sports talk radio show.
I'm not saying Sandy Koufax is overrated, but I will say that if he was an American League pitcher, he'd be below Jim Cott.
You really think so?
Absolutely.
And it hasn't changed one bit since. First time, long time eventually became everywhere all the time, as Mike and the Mad Dog's successful formula of always yelling at each other didn't lead to the fall of an empire, but instead helped build Rome, as the 5 full-time sports radio stations at the start of the 90s became 130 by 1995.
The one thing about sports talk radio that gets forgotten is it isn't very expensive to make. And so if you look at this and you're like, so basically all we need is people and microphones, and we can then print money off of that, then yeah, sports talk radio is the absolute template for where those things, ultimately wound up going.
Of course, eventually the mad cowherd disease would make its way to TV. So let's hop in the George Michael sports time machine and fast forward a bit, like you might have done on the Sports Center you taped right before you wound up watching it on a loop anyway. Because eventually, back became take, as the embrace debate era dawned.
The ESPN didn't even have much in the way of opinion. That's why Mark Shapiro said, I want to create this thing. Here's what we don't have.
Well, PTI revolutionized sports television in every way.
And we told Mark, we don't want to debate. We want to be more like Siskel and Ebert. We want to have subtlety. We want to have nuance. We're not here to debate. And we didn't. We don't, no matter what people think.
Pardon the interruption. It was a conversation. Sometimes they disagreed. Sometimes they agreed. You're just getting two different kind of takes. But the idea wasn't necessarily that they were in opposition to each other. On Around the Horn, Bill Wolf and I and some others were like, no, the whole point is the argument. In fact, that's going to be the show.
If you go look at the cable news networks, all the way top to bottom, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, whatever it is, they all have a show that's like Around the Horn.
TV critics didn't like it, who tended to be older, and they called it a shouting match. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, it's a sports debate. How do you usually have sports debates? In hushed tones or usually yelling at each other, right?
While shows like The Sports Reporters were a precursor, the modern slate was likely born when PTI debuted in 2001. given it became ESPN's top-rated studio show, interrupting the network's entire slate of programming around the horn, which then led to something once called cold pizza becoming hot takes, or first take. Hi, Stephen A.
Stephen A. Smith, the part that he doesn't get nearly enough credit for is how thoughtful he is and how much effort he gives to actually considering the things that he's going to say on television.
You know, Stephen A. and I watched the event. We think largely the same stuff as most people think largely the same stuff about a sporting event. So the work, like I hear a lot of the time, well, you guys disagree about everything. Are you putting us on? And it's like, no, actually the work of the show before the show ever begins is finding out where we disagree.
Nowadays, sports analysts have almost become more like professional wrestling characters. But for all the complaints, the audience must relate, given one of the commentators in question just got paid millions purely for LeBron hate. But what exactly are the take rules? Is it really the hotter the better? And does everybody actually believe what they're saying?
I hope that people believe what they're saying. And that idea that they never occurred to me.
I've never gone up there and just said something I totally don't believe because I need a take. No, it's not effective that way.
There's always going to be levels of people who are going too far, but I still think, though, given how many people want to do that kind of stuff, in the end, the people who are doing it most visibly are going to be people who are good at it.
I said Tom Brady was better than Drew Bledsoe because I watched him. He was a kid. He was a 6th round pick, but he was really good. And I thought he was better than Bledsoe. And there was an executive who will remain nameless who said, you can't go on TV and say Brady's better than Bledsoe because it sounded ridiculous at the time. I was like, yes, I can. It's what I believe, and so I did.
Now, even if there were take rules, they can't really be enforced anymore because today one doesn't need TV, radio, or the newspaper to have a platform. The next opinion is only a send button away. To the point, some people can't take it anymore.
Nobody can admit what they don't know. You used to be able to say, man, I need to pick that up. I need to find out more about it. People don't want to do that anymore because they're convinced they know every goddamn thing because they've got a phone. It's Citizen Kane now because they got a phone, a cell phone.
You know what they say about opinions and in relation to certain body parts, right? I won't repeat it, but I think you and everyone watching and listening will know what I mean. It's so true. Everybody with one of those things can have an opinion. It doesn't mean it's valid.
I think bad opinions have existed since people have existed.
Yeah, I think the problem isn't so much that anybody can put it out, but how many people feel like they got to say something all the time. And that's where we wind up with the issue. And I've been a person who's definitely gotten out here and had a lot of things to say a lot of times and probably should have kept to myself because I didn't have the appropriate level of expertise to really say something that was worth hearing. But people do believe that there's an intrinsic value in just saying something for the sake of having said it. And that's where you wind up with problems. Like sometimes you just got to be able to look up and realize, hey, this ain't mine. I'm letting this one go.
But I also do think that keeping people engaged is very important. So you kind of have to walk that line, right? Like you can't be super boring and you have to have an opinion so that people care and want to listen and think, oh, that's compelling, but you don't want to troll people or say something simply to get a rise out of them.
So where do we go from here? Well, other than TikTok, of course.
Finding out the score is easy, right? What people are going to tune into television for, or even YouTube clips, is analysis. And especially takes that, it's not just like, hey, they got smarter, but that move people emotionally.
I think it's harder to have a good opinion than it is to have a bad opinion. And I think a good opinion takes more time and research than a bad opinion. And so I just hope that we keep building in time for people to really think about things as opposed to just getting faster and faster and faster.
Local is always going to matter. People are going to want to know things going into games. They're going to talk about things immediately after games. And so I think there's always going to be an audience that goes in that direction. But I think it's probably going to wind up being more specialized. You're going to see a lot fewer like jack of all trades, general columnists, general opinion people, like that kind of thing. I think that's going to wind up going away. And a lot of it's just going to really become hyper local.
It's something that's front of mind now as we explore things, particularly as we look at social justice and we look at major issues that need opinion makers and shapers, influencers. And I worry just a lot of these people I don't want to hear. I want to hear the people who are really thoughtful and really informed, and they don't need to be journalists. They need to be great storytellers. Who are the greatest storytellers? Sometimes it's some old uncle sitting at a fireplace at your Thanksgiving dinner. They need to be great storytellers.
All right, we've gone from horse racing and boxing to box scores to columns to everyone having a podcast. Opinions obviously aren't going anywhere, even if all nuance is gone. You just have to remember, Twitter is not real life. And the things the pros, like myself, say are designed to get engagement. As far as the takeaway, I guess a good take is like cold pizza after all. The substance is what matters, not necessarily the temperature. I'm Robin Lundberg, and now you know.